Remember when we were growing up, the people that got email the fastest, the people that got Facebook, Google the fastest, really had the power, right? Because they were able to connect faster, they were able to search faster. AI will be the same. And people that know how to prompt, they know how to discern information from prompts, will be the guys that actually were the first ones on Google. And so knowing how to manipulate it, knowing how to control it, knowing how to deal with it is especially critical. Knowing who they are within the technology is really the most important piece.
All right, welcome everybody. This is the first episode of What I Think, and it stands for WIT. And I want to bring a perspective to different topics, and specifically, I really want to talk about artificial intelligence because, man, it's everywhere, and you just can't run away from it. And so I wanted to start with a good friend of mine, Taklo. He started an incubator called Zeroth AI, and he's one of the first in Hong Kong, and maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, 8 or 9 years ago. Is that
That's
right?
It's in the world, in fact. Yeah.
So before artificial intelligence was a thing, now it's a huge thing. And Tak's been traveling the world, talking, giving lectures. He wrote a book. And so we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to leave the link in the description for you to find out more about him. But I really want to start from the beginning, learn about artificial intelligence, what it means to us, maybe even potentially the ethics behind it, things like that. So Tak, how's it going?
Doing well. Thanks for inviting me on the show, Derek.
So let's start from the beginning. Let's give everyone just a general description of what artificial intelligence is and what it means to them.
Sure. Yeah. So I can kind of briefly tell you kind of my journey as well. So I started focused on investing on artificial intelligence about actually 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, with something, as you mentioned, called Zeroth. It was after my experience in London investing through Techstars, which is one of the world's largest accelerator programs. And I really felt that the future of technology was really going to be AI based. Then I started focusing on only investing in Asia around those technologies. And kind of it's a roundabout kind of way to answer your question, but I do think the very nature of artificial intelligence changes very quickly. As you can probably tell, there's always something going on. There's always something new going on. So that journey, I think, at that time is very different from kind of what's going on in now 2025. But generally, essentially, the way I think about artificial intelligence is really being able to train and work with a superpower that really knows you better than almost anybody else and on tap 24/7 and aid you to accomplish many more things than you were capable of either with a team or with investors, because you can pretty much do it all on your own.
Wow, you call it a superpower. I like that.
100%.
What are the things that I can do with artificial intelligence? Just me, like a regular guy trying to do my job.
Yeah, so a couple things. So I've got a lecture that I'm delivering actually now at AUA, which is the American University of Armenia. So my focus really is kind of entrepreneurship and leadership in the age of AI. So what can you do? It goes anything from kind of very simple tasks, right? So if you have ChatGPT or Poe or DeepSeek, or let's say Claude even. So you have kind of execution level type of tasks, right? So just your normal kind of day-to-day prompting, right? How do you add 2 plus 2? You can go kind of even more sophisticated, right? So for example, I'm helping out with my London Business School alumni club. We're trying to figure out the break-even analysis for ticket pricing. So you can go a little bit deeper as well. And I still call this kind of execution analysis type of tasks. I think what I'm really interested in and what I think it's moving towards is really kind of this, I call it conciliary prompting. And I use the word conciliary because it's for people that enjoy kind of Godfather, right? So the conciliary is someone that is an advisor. In the Godfather, someone that's non-Italian. It's the lawyer. I think who was it played by? It was played by Robert Duvall. And so he was an Italian. He was a lawyer by trade. He was impartial. He gave Mafia Don impartial advice. And so that's the way I think about AI now. It can be impartial. It's very intimate. And it's on 24/7. So it's very strategic in the sense that it can give you advice about how to place my time, what tasks to work on. It's got a memory to tell you, oh, okay, you were working on this yesterday. You're working on this tomorrow. You think you were working on this tomorrow. Maybe you should not balance your efforts like that. So it's got the memory function. It's got a strategic function. It's got an execution function as well, right? So what we talked about, you can say, what's 2 plus 2? You can go a little bit kind of more sophisticated and do a little more research as well. So it's got everything. Plus, it's got the psychological piece. And we're starting to see more and more of that psychological piece. And what I mean by that is that people are actually talking to ChatGPT or Poe, again, whatever AI, in a more intimate basis, right? So it could be anything like girlfriend's boyfriend, relationship issues. It could be business issues, but team. What do we do with this team member? This team member is not performing. What do we do? And so that intimacy that AI has created, I think allows both those three things, the strategic, the execution, and the psychological piece to what I think I call it, again, the conciliatory prompting rather than kind of execution style prompting.
I love it. I love that you're talking movies. You're making it digestible for me.
It took a long time to try to figure out what to call it. So it really did. So
That's all I care about, those movies. So
yeah, there's a UPenn professor called Malik. And so he wrote a paper and essentially kind of there's two types of prompting, or there are many types of prompting, and we can get to the technical part. And this is actually all going to be in my new book. I'm talking about kind of education and AI. And so there's a cyborg type prompting and a centaur type prompting. Essentially, those two promptings I feel it's one is kind of more AI. It's basically whether you're intimate with the AI or not intimate with the AI. But I felt that still didn't go as far as kind of what I'm seeing in terms of prompting and how people use AI. And that's kind of why I want to create a movie-based analogy, right, for what I'm seeing.
Centaur.
Correct.
And that's a mythological creature that had, correct me if I'm wrong, like a human body, and then the legs were like a horse?
Correct. Yes, correct. I think he wanted to do, stuff with a combination of both, I think, human and some other being, right? So a centaur is the half bull, half human in Greek. Roman mythology, I believe. And then obviously cyborg is an upgrade of that with human and machine. Now I wanted to do something with a C as well, which is why the conciliary came up. But I wanted to capture, I think, that intimacy, right? Again, that it's not the fact that it's one being, right? So like a centaur or cyborg, but the fact that it is a different being or something separate of you, but yet intimate enough that knows kind of everything. To some degree, it's better that it is somebody else because then you can reflect, right? It's that physical kind of piece of going to somebody, telling somebody your intimate secrets and intimate kind of business strategies and really wanting an impartial response, right? What would you do? What do you think? And that advisory kind of relationship, that conciliatory type of relationship, that trusted relationship is really what I was trying to strive for.
Wow. Okay. It's almost like it can be a part of you, but you can talk to yourself.
Correct.
An extension
In fact, it's
of
not,
you.
Yeah, it's extension of you. It's not a part of you, which is, I think, what centaur and the word centaur and cyborg I felt was too close, right? It's a part of you. It's not a part of you. It's a separate thing, but because that separation is good, because that separation allows impartiality, right? It knows you very well as if it's you, but it implies some sort of separation that allows you to kind of say, okay, I'm going to put my ideas to that thing and allow it to really impartially give me the best advice that it could allow rather than being biased in certain ways. Now, again, we have seen with AI, it can be a bias. It can hallucinate. And that's kind of also where proper prompting comes into it. So what I found, and I wrote a book about, so I've written two books. One is Leadership in the Age of AI. The other book is really kind of a big book of prompting. So 365 different prompts. And the next book I'm going to talk about is really kind of AI and education. And part of this is really how to use AI in education. Where do prompts kind of come into this? Or how to prompt as well. And something that I tell actually my students is it's really not about just the prompting itself, but actually kind of saying the AI could hallucinate. AI can give you responses that are a little bit outside of your boundary. So you as the human, you have to kind of take this role as an editor and really kind of give it constraints. Both give it constraints and basically also say if it hallucinates too much or it gives you things outside its parameters, to rein it back a little bit. And that type of discrimination, that editorial kind of hat is really, really important as you prompt.
Oh, that's interesting. I've heard that people talk about prompt engineers, but I didn't really think about the prompt creating specificity so that it becomes impartial. Because if you're not specific, then it could influence you anyway or already have biases built in and you have to steer it towards where you want it to go?
100%. So prompting changes constantly. So I was talking to another entrepreneur as well. And the newest model is basically what we found is the newest model on ChatGPT 401 is much better essentially at kind of one direct question or one general question. And then it kind of gives you a lot of responses, right? It gives you a kind of a whole list and possibilities of things. But it's more human response oriented when giving you a response. 4.0 kind of gives you have to be quite specific on what you you want. So pretend if you're a social media person, or pretend as if you're a marketing manager, I'm trying to create the social media LinkedIn post about blah, 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 bullet point, bullet point. So you kind of have to give it its boundaries in a more discreet way versus 401. What we've discovered is you can actually be a little more free form. What we're thinking is actually that will be the direction of AI. It will be much more free flow, right? Much more human based, much more as if it's an analyst or a senior analyst or whatever it may be. But again, the very nature of prompting does change over time. And also the nature of prompting does change over different AIs, right? So Claude will be very different from Gemini, which is going to be very different from ChatGPT. But I think going back to that kind of the prompt engineering piece, the specific term, I think I'm trying to move away from kind of prompt engineering and very specific prompts and really trying to advocate for this kind of conciliatory type of prompting, because I think that really unleashes the power of AI when it's both strategic execution and of psychological. And all three components really harnesses, I think, everything that AI can offer.
Will the AI at a certain point, is it collecting data about my questions? And then after a while, you're like, steak. And then it gives you how you like it. It's like, 50% cooked or sirloin or whatever, any specifics on that. And you just say, steak, I want it. And they give you what you want.
Yeah. So in terms of like the memory function and kind of the interoperability between the different chats, it does depend. So now ChatGPT has a function where you have different chats. And so you can have different conversations with it. And then you can actually put the conversations in a project. And what I've noticed is it works, the memory function and the interconnectedness of its memory works better if it's in a project. Now, even within between different chats, I have noticed that it still does work. Memory does work and it does retain some things, but also doesn't, it doesn't retain everything. But that is, I think, the general kind of piece and the direction where this will go, right? So the fact is, if it has perfect memory, perfect recall of actually what you're trying to do across chats, whether it's across chats or whether it's within one project, yes, Derek, you could probably say, look, I want steak sometime this week. And the next time you prompt, you say, that steak, should I do medium rare? Right? That would be the perfect piece from a chat perspective. I think the perfect piece would be basically injecting AI directly into your daily life, right? So unfortunately, in Hong Kong, we can't play with Apple Intelligence and ChatGPT. I'm still trying to figure out whether I can actually get it to work. But again, that intimacy on a device that you carry around with you all the time with that almost kind of perfect memory and recall and that untapped capability, I think is really the power of AI and ultimately kind of what I was thinking about 10, 15 years ago.
I think that is a good kind of general overview of artificial intelligence and where it can go. And it just really can be applied to any field, whether it's medical or it's financial, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't we jump into DeepSeek then, since you mentioned Hong Kong and access, because I think that just came out. That's very relevant. And, I'd just be curious your overall opinion of when that came out and what it means for artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so I haven't been able to download DeepSeek yet. I was traveling at the time and just wasn't convenient. And actually, to be honest, it was a shock. I didn't see it. I didn't even know it was being worked on. But I think if you ask anybody, anyone that's on the news, they didn't see it coming. Because basically, I know one of the LPs of DeepSeek's fund, and they didn't even know. Right. They didn't even know that this was being worked on. So kind of the parameters, or let's just say the circumstances around it is essentially this was a guy with a hedge fund. And one of my Chinese friends sent me kind of the team sheet, right? So third, fourth best university in the world, Zhejiang University, in China, sorry. And then his team is full of Beijing, Tsinghua University types. And this was a side project, right? So this was he has a hedge fund. He's made lots of money. I don't know if we still run the hedge fund, but he's made a lot of money. Essentially, this AI effort is entirely kind of privately funded. I think the fact that he had the money to do it, I think the fact that he had the team and the talent to do it, and most importantly, he actually had a lot of GPUs. So my friend, the LP, told me basically he had the most GPUs in China in 2023. Definitely, I think he was able to train his model as well. So if you ask, I think right now the controversy is, did it really cost a tenth of what it costs OpenAI? How did he do it? Did he copy actually OpenAI's data? Where maybe, I don't know. I didn't ask my friend to kind of figure that out. But what I do think it's interesting is that cost is probably a lot less in OpenAI OpenAI. So that's fantastic. Innovation can come anywhere. I think the fact that it came from China, I think is really interesting and good. So non-US, right? So not only from a cost perspective, it's lower, but it literally can come anywhere, right? It can come from China. Perhaps it can come from India as well. So that opportunity and the talent and that capability to build AI from anywhere is really the thesis that I had at Xeroth, right? That it could come from Asia. Glad to kind of finally see 10, 11 years later that that's proven right. And then I think the third thing that was interesting is really kind of the bubble that it pierced, right? So afterwards, there was 600 billion. Did I get the numbers right? 500 billion of market cap that was erased that day after DeepSeek came out. So just because, again, there was another competitor that come in. So I think that bubble piercing of all innovation, maybe not all, but the greatest innovation can come from the US, I think is, that was pierced. And I think that's a good thing, ultimately.
Was that?
No, it wasn't.
It feels it's
No.
open source as well. That's what I know about that as well, which is I think that's great because the meaning behind that is that it's for everybody to use.
But this is all privately funded, right? So I think that's kind of why nobody really knew, because he just basically funded it with his own money. I don't know of any investor that really knew or invested or had an inkling. Again, my friend who's an LP in the old fund, he didn't really know. So I find it kind of hard that anybody else would know. I do want to kind of talk a little bit about kind of the privacy issue. Can we get into that, actually, if that's okay?
Let's see where it goes.
All right.
Well, yeah, I don't know what you have to say.
Well, the controversy was what they initially thought and saw was the responses were eerily similar to OpenAI's responses. And I saw that as well. And I had an inkling of what it was, but I wasn't quite sure what, I didn't bother to kind of check. So essentially what they said is that it was possibly trained on OpenAI data. And so essentially they basically just queried OpenAI constantly and got kind of OpenAI's responses. And then those are the responses that they were trained on, which is why the responses are similar. So there was some controversy, but on the other hand, so Microsoft right now is checking with OpenAI to see whether DeepSeek violated any terms and conditions. Now, it's ironic because OpenAI was also trained on the internet, some open, some behind paywall. And so, I think people are kind of the internet is basically saying, well, it's kind of ironic and it's also kind of poetic in the sense that OpenAI was trained on stuff that was behind paywalls, and DeepSeek kind of did the same thing as well with OpenAI. That's controversy, but I think that's interesting. I think the other thing that was kind of interesting was, there was this dialogue. In fact, I think a US senator just yesterday is trying to prevent not just US employees, but I think even Americans to not use the DeepSeek model. I didn't read the kind of the details of the bill. Well, it's probably kind of intersection of national security, right? Basically. Now, it's kind of interesting how that's an issue because essentially it is an open source model. So yes, the servers are located in China. And so information data is sent to China right now. But if you didn't want that to happen, you can set up your own instance and off you go, right? Then you can kind of do it yourself. So I find that argument kind of interesting and unnecessary as well. And then I think the third piece on kind of privacy and data and controversy is really kind of the responses it gives, right? So kind of the usual trope, people are basically querying it for, and can you talk about Chinese government? And my response to that is essentially, those things are known knowns, right? In Don Rumsfeld's kind of speak. Google operates under US regulations. And so is changing Google Maps to call it Gulf of Americana. So it has to comply with regulations of the land it's in. And so this usual trope of trying to say, well, it's, the model is oppressive or the model is trying to do something it's more Chinese oriented, whatever it may be, it's just a really bad take. People really need to pause and understand the root cause of what's going on before they comment.
Yeah, well, Mark Andreessen was talking about, Facebook and their censorship, essentially. That started back in 2012. So I think what you're saying is, there's kind of this double standard, or because it's China, so then therefore the scrutiny is higher.
100%. 100%. And so, I think there's two parts, right? So how to survive in this age of AI, entrepreneurship in the age of AI talk. I think there's kind of two intersections. And so people ask me, right, when I was in Armenia last week, what do you see as a trend in the next 10 years? Obviously, AI is moving towards the trend, but that's going and that has its own speed, right? And so it is what it is, and that'll just keep innovating. I think what's interesting is multipolarity in geopolitics. And so I comment on a lot on X now around that subject. And so on the slides, I have this book by John Mearsheimer. I don't know if your listeners, but if you don't, go on YouTube, you'll see a lot of John Mearsheimer books and talks. John Mearsheimer is this political science professor at the University of Chicago, my alma mater. I attended one or two of his lectures there. He is best known for explaining basically the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and what will happen and how it'll transpire and why it happened and how it resolve. And he's remarkably right on that. And so essentially his book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, is basically saying that there are great powers. The US was a regional hegemony for a long time. No one's ever seen a regional hegemony just like the US, and it'll never happen again. And so everything is splitting apart now. And so US will still retain its US, but it'll be kind of focused on there. And China will be China, and Russia will be Russia, and India will probably be India as well. He didn't actually go into specifics on the nations, especially in India, but he does say something about China. And what my point is that China will be a big pole, and it's got its own technology, and it's got its own apps, and it's got its own ecosystem, and they will do their own thing. Very much like the US will have its own ecosystem and its own apps and all that type of jazz and data sovereignty and everything. And so as we see the countries split apart, the technology ecosystems will also split apart as well. So what we see about what DeepSeek is doing, or what we think DeepSeek is doing, is very normal behavior of what we see, what Facebook is doing and Google is doing, and in India, whatever apps they do, in Russia, whatever, Yandex, they will actually keep their data and their apps and their ecosystem fairly separate. To kind of encapsulate it all, there was, I tell this story a lot. I once asked an Irishman, and if you know anything about Irishmen, they're brutally honest. And this is after drinks, right? So they're even more honest after drinks. And this Irishman entrepreneur operates server farms in both China and the US. And I asked him about data privacy, right? And he essentially said, look, the Chinese say they'll spy on you, and they do. The Americans say they won't, and they do. And so I think that basically encapsulates how I think about national security, manipulation of media, kind of the long reach of the government and law. And I think that basically encapsulates the philosophies of both governments. And I think that'll just continue in the next 10, 15 years. So multipolarity is essentially a concept. We are many poles now. So John Mearsheimer basically is advocating that in the next couple of years, the world will split into different poles. And for example, the US had dominated pretty much the world for the last 10, 15, 20 years, but it was a regional hegemony. And it was one pole. And why is it a kind of regional hegemony? Why is it one pole? Essentially, geography had blessed the United States, right? So you've got the Pacific Ocean and you've got the Atlantic Ocean, two bodies of water that makes it virtually almost impossible to attack. The United Kingdom was also another example because they were always separated by the English Channel from other places in the continental Europe. Now, because of lots of different factors, because of printing too much money, debt, overreach militarily, I think there's a lot of reaction to the United States. And now if we take a look at what's happening with Trump and Secretary Rubio, now they're pursuing kind of more of an isolationist policy. And so the United States is really going to focus on, again, one pole, but really focus on kind of North America. And because of the retreat of the United States, now there are other poles that stand out, right? So Russia will be one pole, China will be one pole, and it'll dominate kind of that region in their kind of spheres of influence. I don't think in the tragedy of great power politics, it mentions kind of in Europe, what would be the dominating kind of influence. Traditionally, it's been Germany, traditionally it's been France, but again, we'll see what will emerge. So the whole concept of multipolarity is instead of one polar entity like the United States, there will be multi-poles in this new world dominating different regions, all vying for power and stability.
I see. The definitions of what artificial intelligence are and what they do and the rule sets behind that will be defined by these different poles.
Correct.
Which could be quite different.
Exactly. So not just kind of AI, but all technology, but mostly AI, because I think every government really is attuned to what the power of AI is. So it's mostly kind of data sovereignty and keeping, I think, the data within a country would be kind of what governments are vying for. And the possession of the algorithm, really, making sure that the algorithm kind of sits locally.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, because, in the beginning of our discussion, we talked about impartiality and what does that truly really mean? Because, that's really tough to be impartial. If the trainer is a parent, then...
It is.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point, which is why going back to the point about the prompter really needs to be aware. And this is kind of where the ethics come into play. The prompt is only as good as the prompter. And the awareness of the prompter is really going to be important. So if the prompter says, I want to see whatever social media post, I want to generate the social media post, and I want to say this, ChatGPT is going to come out and say whatever you want it to say. But if you say, well, I think this has too much of a bias on what I'm doing rather than actually my process, then if you let ChatGPT know, then it'll return with a different response. But if you don't say that, it's going to assume whatever you think you want it to say. And so that awareness of your own bias, I think, is really important as you're prompting so that you can counteract, maybe not counteract, but you're a little bit more aware of, what they say, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So my framework really, when I talk about leadership in the age of AI, really does start with like the self. And I haven't really kind of seen that model or framework anywhere else, but it really starts with the self. And I need to develop that framework to talk a little bit more about the self and the ethical considerations around the self. But I think that's really going to be important in this new age of AI.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like 2025 is, for me, where things are going is a lot about integrity and that how crucial of a role that is overall, not just artificial intelligence. And that's very tough to maintain for anybody.
Yeah, I think that's what I want to study a little bit more and really kind of delve into it. It's been a while since I did philosophy at college. So, and my MBA, I think had a program of, had a class about ethics, but it was only one class. But I think this is a bigger kind of longer study. So it's interesting what you mentioned about ethics, right? And for example, Elon Musk, what he's doing right now with the United States federal government. So I have friends, I used to be in the military, right? So I have friends that are still in the federal government. I have friends that are in the army or used to be in the army, but both as well. And there's two sides of the debate. One, side will say, yeah, drain the swamp, right? Drain the swamp. Down with the deep state. The other one is saying, how the hell are you going to, if you defund FAA, you'll have incidents like this. If you defund USAID, which I know intimately because in Armenia, they rely a lot on USAID aid, you're going to reduce soft power across the United States. And the way I think about it is really also depends on how far you zoom, right? If you zoom, 5 minutes time frame or 5 months, fine. Maybe some of the funding it doesn't make sense. If you zoom out 5 years, 50 years, it starts making sense. So is ultimately Elon Musk ethical? It's arguable. I don't like him. But is he ethical? It's arguable because it depends on your ethical compass. I'm starting to feel that ethics is really integral in the age of AI because your impact, any individual impact, is amplified by this superpower called AI. And so that ethical compass becomes very important because if you're bad, it amplifies this way. If you're good, it amplifies that way. If you're whatever neutral, it amplifies this way. And so that ethical framework is really, really important. I honestly think that in this kind of age of AI, I don't think there will be one ethical framework. I think it'll be very flexible because, again, there's multipolar world now. So we have lots of different ethical boundaries and frameworks and cultural biases that come into it. And so I think everyone kind of has to some degree look out for themselves and align themselves with people with the same ethical frameworks, but also knowing that basically there are a lot of different people with different ethical boundaries and ethical frameworks that will have the same superpower like AI and have influence over the world. And we just have to kind of deal with that. So the next book I'm thinking about is something called Sovereign Man. And it's a kind of a take on Vitruvian Man, like Leonardo da Vinci's kind of painting, which is basically the optimal person, right? So that was the unity of both kind of beauty and intellect. And I think what I'm trying to advocate for in Sovereign Man is kind of that unity of the perfect person or perfect man in the age of AI and what that looks like.
Well, let me ask you a question. Well, just as a hypothetical, I'm curious. Could AI evaluate the ethics of multiple systems? And because someone would have to train that one.
Yeah, 100%. So
Right.
could it evaluate? Yeah. I think I've never actually asked ChatGPT, like, what do you think of my ethics? I think there are possibly two kind of considerations here, right? One is it's bounded by kind of its ethical frameworks that it's kind of at least trained on. And I think it's also bounded by what it thinks I want to hear. It may give me a response where it thinks that's kind of what I want to hear, or it gives me a response that basically is again kind of trained on different models. Let me give you an example. I met an entrepreneur once that basically wanted to create a new AI. Obviously, lots of people, different model. And his way of doing it was saying that I'm going to create an entire new kind of Reddit, but focus on China. And basically, I'm going to train the AI based off of that data. And I was like, why the hell would you do that? That sounds painful, blah, blah, blah. And it was kind of giving me the sound. It was basically saying, like, whatever's on the open internet right now is only 5% of the world's kind of knowledge, right? It's only a small portion if we think about it. So if you say the open internet is a microcosm of really just Western thought, and that's really what encompasses, the bias of it is actually pretty extreme. And so for it to evaluate, let's say, an Indian ethical framework, right? And again, I don't profess to know kind of Indian ethics very, very well, but let's just say Chinese ethics, right? Like, oh, okay, my parents are old, they're 80, I live, in Hong Kong, but they're in the United States. Do I put them in old folks' home? So I think for a Western mentality, it'd be like, sure, put them in Western home. It's more practical, it's more economical, that type of thing. Western culture is actually more idealistic, right? And not just idealistic, but individualistic. If you feed it into an ethical framework that's more trained on Chinese data and Confucian values, it'll say, hell no. You can't put your parents in an old folks' home. You move in with them or you invite them back home with you or whatever it may be, right? You're close at home. Hell no, you would never do that. That's what I mean. It's that training and that bounding by what the information was shapes how it'll respond. I'm not saying one is better than the other. That's exactly not what I'm saying. And that's why the prompter, the self, is actually really important in the age of AI to understand not only what myself and what I want and not let AI manipulate me on what it thinks I should do, but really also understand myself and really what do I want, right? Am I more like the Western model where, yeah, I'll send my kid, my parents to, old folks home, or am I more on the Chinese model or the Confucian model, which is hell no, that would never happen, right? Never in a million years. So I think that's the awareness of the self that's really going to be important.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is completely on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Exactly.
Just from that point of view, especially cultural. Let's shift gears. I want to know, why were you in Armenia? What's going on there that has to do with all the stuff that you're up to?
So I started going to Armenia about 5-6 years ago when I still lived in Europe. Every single year I would go back. There's an event called Startup Seaside Summit, which is kind of a Burning Man / startup type event, but it's camping. And I kind of really enjoyed it. And the people are hospitable, they're nice, they're friendly, they're very welcoming. And currently I teach there now. I'm an assistant professor, visiting associate professor in entrepreneurship in the age of AI at the American University of Armenia. And I love it. And I just kind of came back last Friday. But deep down inside, there are 2 or 3 things that are fascinating about Armenia. One is the geopolitics. I think a lot about that because I do think that's really going to be the trend in the next couple of years. And what's interesting about Armenian geopolitics is it's in the middle of everything, right? The biggest US embassy outside of Iraq is in Armenia because it's right next to Iran. Russia is right there and trying to vie for dominance of that. It's next to Turkey and Azerbaijan, which has always been trying to conquer Armenia. Germany is there, France is there. Everyone's trying to vie for dominance of that region. And so there's just always geopolitics around that region, which I find fascinating. So everyone's trying to go through because that way you can connect. I forgot the 2 C's that it connects. But if you can create that corridor that Turkey and Azerbaijan is trying to do, kind of create this kind of corridor between that Turkish empire, that Ottoman empire. So the geopolitics is fascinating in this thing. The other thing is entirely private, but the other reason why I'm fascinated about Armenia is the old culture that it represents. So Armenia is the first Christian nation in the world. And I'm not Christian, but I'm just always fascinated by this thing. So Lord Byron, the poet, always said, if you want to speak to God, you speak Armenian. And I've always been fascinated by this quote and why Armenian. This is actually when I went back this time. The first time actually, I went to service, Armenian service, and I recorded the service, the liturgy. And I think there's something fascinating about the language as a construct, whether you speak to God or not, I don't know. But I think there's some fascinating piece with that language and its presence and its use with the church, as well as all the kind of church and religious artifacts that it has. For example, are you Christian? Do you remember
Christian.
you are. What was it? The Lance of, what was this called?
I'm not going to be the database
yeah.
historical evidence.
Yes, I believe Longinus, the lance that try to see whether Jesus was dead or alive, right? So that is in Armenia. There's like four artifacts, right? But one is supposed in Armenia. There's also supposed to be a piece of Noah's Ark, actually is supposed to be in Armenia. And so there is this, again, fascinating kind of historical piece that I'm still trying to figure out. Maybe I'm just like Indiana Jones and what was it, The Last Crusade type of thing. But I think that piece for me is super fascinating. And that's something I want to focus on. Now, as much as I'm technology forward and thinking about AI and everything, I think there's still a lot of knowledge and body of knowledge that actually we still don't quite understand. And I do think that body of knowledge, there's a lot of body of knowledge in kind of these religious and holy kind of sites. And I think I'm also fascinated about what knowledge and what secrets it may unfold.
It's amazing how much there's not much news about Armenia, but when you actually do your research, then, there's always some kind of war controversy in that region just because of its geographic location. And I was looking at the map, it's really sandwiched between all the other countries and doesn't really even touch a body of water, I think, just under constant encroachment.
Yeah, it's under
and it's right there at the hotbed of, a lot of these religious history. So
100%. So there's been two patterns. There was the Armenian genocide. And so a lot of the Armenian diaspora that you see in Glendale, they all left during that time, maybe early 1900s. A bunch of them moved to the US and France. And so that piece moved. The last 5 years, there was also a war as well with Azerbaijan. And so a bunch moved and they were killed as well. I'm sure you heard it from Armenian friends.
But so, just like you never see it in mainstream news, though. I mean,
you never see it in mainstream
news. It's very like the bottom of the page kind of thing. So
100%. And all Armenians kind of know this. But I was fascinated because it's like, yeah, they keep their culture. So there's more Armenians. The diaspora is bigger than the people in Armenia. But they've always kept their structure. They've always kept their pride. And I was like, how the hell did they do that? Like, I've seen different immigrant communities, the Chinese, the Koreans, and they don't keep it as well as the Armenians. The Armenians really, really tight. And so I think the key for that, I think, is the language and the church. Again, that's kind of why I'm fascinated. But yeah, it's not reported in mainstream news, which is what you do is important, right? So it surfaces ideas and things that may not be on mainstream news.
Love the flatbread, by the way, for any Armenians listening.
Lavash. The lavash is good. That's right. I love the lavash.
And they actually make good pizza, by the way, too.
Oh, is it that right? Okay.
To kind of connect the dots, you went there, you were invited there, or you were curious about the history, but that's how you kind of ended up teaching there?
So I was first invited there 5-6 years ago to participate in this competition called Startup Seaside Summit, which is a combination of Burning Man and technology and entrepreneurship. And then 2 years ago, I said to Yurvan, my MBA classmate, who was from there, that I want to kind of help more deeply, right? I didn't want to just go there once every year and do this camp thing and leave. And that's when he found something with the American University of Armenia, where I could be an assistant professor and really teach a 15-week course on entrepreneurship. And I said, okay, that gives me more time to go back. Never go there during the winter. Winter it's really brutal. Summer's much better. 100%. Summers are much better.
Well, I love the fact that you're going to somewhere other than Silicon Valley. But tell me about the technology there. I mean, are they encouraging? Is it a great place to be? People talk a lot about different places of, where things are happening. Maybe we'll talk about Dubai after this. But what's it like there? Are there like a great startup culture there? And
yeah, so the startup culture, I think, in Armenia is pretty raw. It's pretty new. There's a couple of big startups. It's Pixart is one. Superannotate is another one. I'm just naming a few. Service Titan is another one. But it's mostly kind of remote work, or so like Armenians, but, building in the US. So that's kind of the nature of it. There's also a big kind of crypto market over there. So because kind of the traditional, what I've noticed is traditional finance systems that kind of don't work or are not there, crypto will kind of rise up, right, and become that. So crypto is quite big. You'll see a lot of crypto exchanges over there as well. That's pretty interesting. People are fluent in Russian, people are fluent in English, so people can operate in different markets. That's pretty interesting. I can actually talk a bit about Silicon Valley. I was there probably about during the fall, during Christmas. AI is huge in the Valley. Crypto, I don't hear anything about crypto anymore over there, or Web3 or whatever you want to call it. But I think this is something that actually you won't won't get in the news. So during COVID, a lot of people moved out of the valley. So they moved up north, they moved up to Seattle or LA, or they moved out to entirely to like Texas, to really get away. I'm hearing that people are coming back to the valley. But again, some people are preferring to kind of work remotely and to kind of at least start a new life. So there's a movement to try to get people back. So what you read in the news and everything could be just propaganda, and people are just trying to encourage people to come back. Again, a lot of people have moved away already, which I think is an interesting trend. And people are definitely moving to Texas and Florida because of taxes. Most of the content creators are actually in Texas. So Chris Williams, I think, is over there. Joe Rogan is over there. So there's a whole movement to go there as well. And Elon is over there, right, with Tesla. Again, it's a combination of tax and just really kind of policies, right? It's more libertarian. It's more conservative, but I think for liberals, it's considered more libertarian for them. Essentially, what that means is we can build our company, we've got our own backyard, and nobody comes in, right? That's how Texas is. I grew up in Texas, so that's kind of.
I was going to say, yeah, you grew up there.
No, exactly. So basically, you've got your own house, you've got your own backyard. If anybody comes, you can shoot them, right? So that's basically how Texas is. Don't mess with me. Let me do my own thing. And that's really how Texas is. And that's kind of how I think Florida is as well. And this kind of coincides with another trend, right? If you see Meta is considering moving away from Delaware, Bill Altman with his hedge fund is considering moving out of Delaware, which is, I had never heard of that. Right, moving out of Delaware. The Delaware is like the most vanilla of places to be if you want to incorporate. But, people are thinking about moving out of Delaware. And why is that? You ask. So a lot of people are thinking about it because of actually what happened with Elon and how shareholders are able to negotiate. So shareholders with Tesla were able to negotiate his compensation package and what he felt was really his. And so a lot of people are kind of thinking about that and whether shareholders should actually have that much power. So I think Meta is thinking about Texas, the hedge fund, Bill Altman's hedge fund, I forgot where exactly, but there's this general movement. And it wasn't just Bill, it was his lawyers advocating that. So I think there's this general movement as well in the United States where things are now spreading to different places and kind of a uprooting of what was considered traditionally right or vanilla or expected.
What part of Texas did you grow up in?
Houston, Texas.
And you also served as well.
I was, yeah.
Where were you stationed?
I was grew up in Houston, Texas, Sugar Land, Texas, for those that know Houston a little bit better. And then I served in the U.S. military. Basic training was in Fort Leonard Wood. So shout out to my peeps from the 50th Engineer Company. So they were really great, people to serve with. Then we all got sent to Korea, to Seoul, where 50th Boat was. And then we got back to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. And then I left the service after that.
I want to ask you about Dubai.
Dubai. Okay.
Yeah. Everyone says, that's where it's at. True? Not true? Your feelings? I know you've probably been there.
Yeah.
One or two times a year. So
yeah,
what's your thing? What's your take?
I'm trying to be diplomatic. No, I like Dubai. I spent time there. I have some friends there. Dubai, I think, is pretty interesting. So a lot of crypto kind of influencers or crypto guys from Hong Kong moved to Dubai. I haven't kind of caught up with them recently. And then I don't know if they were trying to do anything with AI. And then I think recently I saw some news about they're trying to encourage influencers to go there as well. I don't know if you got the call, Derek. And I have some friends that actually were recruited by them. So essentially their scheme is they will give you a gold card visa, right? So I think that's not a permanent resident, but I think it's a residence type of visa. If you're an influencer, if you're somebody known, they're trying to encourage people to really kind of settle there. My general feeling on Dubai is it moves quick. It is about the bling bling. It moves very quickly. If you offer something to the state, then they'll kind of move mountains for you to go, but it also moves pretty quickly. I like it to visit. I like it to network, but if you want to really put down kind of deep roots, I think it's probably not the best place, but I love it. I love it to travel and network and stuff, but I haven't yet seen something, really concrete there. But I do like the Middle East. I went to Doha this time around. I am talking to a couple of investors in Doha, and I do think there's something interesting in the Middle East. I haven't done Riyadh in Saudi, and I do think it might be something around there as well. But again, I think it remains to be seen. At least with me, it remains to be seen kind of where exactly to put down roots over there. Again, for me, still, it remains to be seen exactly kind of where to set up shop. Where's the permanency in the Middle East?
And what about Hong Kong? What's the scene like
Ah,
for artificial intelligence?
Hong Kong. My view is this. I've been in Hong Kong. My family's been here many generations. I worked with the Hong Kong government as well before as an advisor. I think Hong Kong has bigger fish to fry in the sense that it needs to kind of figure itself out in this whole geopolitical game. Until it does that, it's always just kind of like floating. It's still trying to figure out what it is and what it isn't. The night markets and everything. Pandas. Let's go pandas. West Kowloon, right? We're going to do that. We're going to focus on that. And so it's almost like, bipolar type of personality is just trying to figure out what it is. Until we figure out what we are, I think we won't settle on anything yet. And I think that's really what Hong Kong is. I think Hong Kong will figure it out at some point. But again, it still needs to figure out where it is. And I think the key to that is basically deciding that it is China. That is non-negotiable. Well, that's a legal fact and that's a fact. But then what it is it has to have Western influence as well. It has to build great relationships with Europe, the United States, and it has to be that gateway. As cliche of a word as it has to be the gateway because it is the most Western forward city in China and it has to play that role. And if it doesn't play that role, it has no role for itself and for the nation. And so until it figures that out, then that's a strategy. Then everything kind of falls in place, right? Whether it's a crypto strategy or whether it's an AI strategy, it needs to settle on that first. And then I think everything else can come into place. And I do think that will probably take another 5 years, honestly.
Well, let's say, for example, that it does figure itself out. What can it do to attract talent, like the technology talent that it needs?
At some point, I want to write a book about this as well. I had wanted to just toyed around with writing a book because, and actually the book was about kind of the crypto scene that was built here 10 years ago. Right. And everybody came. FTX was here. Binance was here. BitMEX was here. Hong Kong was actually the place for crypto. And if you think about it, it's like, how the hell did that happen? And I actually asked the OG because I was there. I knew the OG crypto guys. And I was like, how the hell did that happen? And basically the OG crypto guys were basically saying, you had a lot of finance talent here. It was away from the long arm of the United States. And also Hong Kong didn't care because it was this early days of crypto and finance. And so you had all this talent coming together to build crypto companies. And so I think that encapsulates how does Hong Kong attract talent? Don't do anything. Just let it be. Don't regulate. Have little government as possible and talent will want to come here because the weather is good. It is nice. It is, people can come in, stay for 24 hours, 12 hours and go get the next flight over. We live far away from the city, but otherwise it's small. You can get anywhere pretty quickly in 30 minutes. I think it just has to be like government. Don't do much. Let kind of free market kind of prosper and let people do their thing. And I think that's how Hong Kong prospers. And this is not just the crypto history is kind of 10-year history. And I really look through Hong Kong history as well throughout the times. And it's always been like that. So little government as possible. Don't do anything. And that's how Hong Kong will prosper.
Tell me about your Kung Fu. What have you been up to? I've been seeing you practice a little bit.
Yeah, I haven't practiced Kung Fu as much as I should. And so, yeah, it's just the travel and everything. But, I think, again, I'm not Christian, but I have this fascination with old cultures because I think there's a lot of wisdom that what we see in the internet kind of misses on everything. So I think for me, kind of the Armenian religious side is really kind of understanding that world and that knowledge. And then I think for me, Kung Fu is actually the knowledge of taking care, like physical health, taking care of your body, knowing your body, awareness of your body, and wisdom and knowledge that's kind of lost throughout the time. So I still do it. I don't do it as much as I should, but I've done like 50 different styles, right? I've done like Xingyi Bagua. Wing Chun is probably the only thing that you've heard, right? But Xingyi Bagua is really those are kind of more esoteric styles. Tai Chi is something that most people have heard, but I do the esoteric styles. And again, I think that's because of a pursuit of that wisdom and that knowledge that's been lost and most people don't really know. But it's really the power of understanding both your body and physical health and really just awareness, which I'm trying to work on. I don't think I'll ever teach, though. That's probably not my thing. I'll keep the knowledge in my own body.
Oh, I thought you were training for the octagon, actually.
I would. If someone were to challenge me or find a worthy challenge, I'm happy to go in the ring to anybody. But yeah, not for right now. Is that a challenge, Derek? Do you want to get in the octagon?
No interest in any of that. In knowing you, where do you think your thirst to understand the gamut, like many different things, where do you think that comes from? Is that something that maybe your parents kind of instilled in you?
I think that's a good question. I actually never thought about that. But perhaps if I can think of anything, it's the pursuit of truth, right? It was always the pursuit of truth and what is real and what's not. And so that's probably the drive, right? The pursuit of truth and whatever that is. Is there an absolute truth? No. It's really the journey, I think, of that truth that I find meaningful. And maybe I should document, the Chinese kind of martial art journey because that is that truth there. And then that way people can also follow and find their own truth there. But I think it's really the pursuit of truth is what's driving most everything. And when you pursue that truth, you kind of have to go down those rabbit holes where a lot of people may not have gone, right? So whether it's like geopolitics, whether it's AI, whether it's martial arts, you have to find, I think, the best and get their side of what's going on and listen and hear and try to process that, right? So as an example, I know lots of martial arts masters, 15, 20 generations of martial arts. One of my friends is Tai Chi master. He's from the original Chen Tai Chi family. And so it's always fascinating to kind of hear from him and understand the very nature of Tai Chi, the very nature of what it means and why they did it and what does it mean. For example, Peng Fei is his name, PF. It was basically saying the original Tai Chi guys were basically bodyguards, right? Because they were security, because they had to transport gold and whatever stuff between kind of different villages in China. And so his village actually is in the intersection of a lot of this highway, right? The old highway of China. And so they stumbled upon this business because his village was on the way of many different of these kind of transportation companies. They're like, oh, we can do business, right? Why don't we just accompany them? We know some martial arts. We accompany them, we train harder, and then we will be their security, be like the transporter. And so they did. So they trained the entire village. Everybody was very good at Tai Chi. And so they became this transporter bodyguard type of thing. And now they're obviously known for just Tai Chi and everything, but that's historically how they came about. So again, we can make up stories and fables about whether Tai Chi is the ultimate kind of martial art and that type of thing. But, the truth is essentially that's how they started.
And just out of practicality.
100%. Want to do business.
Were you always this way? Or was there a shift? Were you a lazy person growing up? Were you always productive? Were you traveling a lot?
Yeah, that's true. Growing up, I traveled a lot. My father was a banker, so we always traveled every 2, 3 years. We go someplace else, so Singapore or Hong Kong. So I think probably that instills some of it. So if you see so many different things, you're more interested in the commonality between things, right? So that probably sparked some of that. But I think I was just always curious, right? I read a lot. I was a bit of a nerd. So I think it was always that. I was thinking about this the other day as well, right? Like I'm trying to go to Armenia again, but this time around, I want to shoot some sort of like Top Gear type of style thing in Armenia. I mean, I've always been fascinated by like the British explorers, right? The guys going to the North Pole, guys going to the jungle. So I was always fascinated by ideas of adventurers, people that took risks. And so I think that the truth is part of the intellectual side, but I think it's always just been adventure. Going out and trying to see new things and trying to push and trying to understand the world as it is and taking kind of steps that maybe people have not taken. That's always been inside me rather than just maybe the truth in and of itself. It's being a risk taker, being an adventurer, really.
Interesting. So more innate rather than maybe a life instance woke you up or an awakening.
No, I think it's always been innate. I think what it is it's really just kind of discovering that and not going one direction or going another direction. As I get older, I think it's more being confident that that's my path rather than saying, oh, okay, maybe I should be doing this or I should listen to somebody or maybe it's this or being distracted. I think it's more listening to that path more than anything else.
Were you a confident person always? You mentioned that.
In different circumstances, I was confident, but I generally don't think confidence is really kind of where I like to be. Generally, I like to be real, and then I can turn on confidence if I want. Generally, I like just to be honest and real. So when you ask me questions, right, I try to be as honest and real as I can be. I can give you a confident response, as if I know what I'm doing. But I generally like to kind of caveat things and say, I'm not quite sure, right? This is only one interpretation of things. And I think that's generally, I'm pretty right because I do think about it a lot. But no, I wouldn't say I'm generally a confident person. Do I look like a confident person?
Well, you just mentioned it because I was just wondering if maybe you were not confident when you were younger. I certainly for myself, it took me a while to gain confidence and to build on it. And I think I was probably not so confident as a kid growing up. And
Really?
yeah.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
wow. I'm trying to think. Was I not a confident? No, I was confident in where I stood, I think. I was pretty confident where I stood. But I've certainly gained confidence. And I'm sure it's the same with you. I think it goes back to what I said. As I grow, I don't think I've added. In fact, I think I've sculpted away. It's like a sculpture, right? A lot of stone. And it's sculpted away over the years. And it's the true self that emerges. Rather than adding to something, I think, at least for me, my journey has been chipping away at what I really want and care and am ultimately good at. I certainly believe that that's powerful because the more you understand you and the more you understand what you want, have you heard about the whole concept of manifesting?
Sure.
Manifesting whatever, you're thinking about, right?
Hmm.
So to some degree, I think that's like baloney, right? Like I want to manifest, a Big Mac.
I was about to say, yeah, a nice
Yeah,
thing.
where the hell's a Big Mac? Yeah, right? Yeah, manifest fucking Big Mac. Like generally you can intentionally move towards a goal, right? And I do think that over time you have no control on the timing. You don't know if it's tomorrow, but you'll kind of move towards that subliminally. Your intention will move you towards that somehow, right? So if you want to be very brutal about, yeah, if you kind of think Big Mac, Big Mac, Big Mac, yeah, you'll subliminally kind of move towards the McDonald's, and then the Big Mac will manifest in front of you and you'll buy it. So I believe in that to some degree. And so I think the more clear you are on who you are as you're sculpting away, you're more clear on what you want to manifest in life, right? You say, oh, this is important to me. So you start thinking about that and you kind of move towards what you want. But if you're clouded about what you don't want or things that other people want or things that you think you want, but you don't really want, then you're confused. And I don't think you're very good at manifesting. So this is actually something I want to talk about in the book Sovereign Man, which is the more clarity that you have, if you do believe in manifesting, that you're more able to manifest the things that matter to you. And so I think that is important.
I like it. All right. Well, let's do one more thing before we finish our conversation, and we will continue this conversation as well at a later time. Let's make an extreme prediction about artificial intelligence, or just one that's further out, or where you think you see things going. Anything that you want to say about artificial intelligence, about where it's going, or I'm
Yeah.
listening to you on that.
Yeah, the big thing right now, my mind generally thinks like the next step and then like 15, 20 years later. So I think right now what people are talking about AI agents, right? NVIDIA was saying basically you don't need an HR department anymore. Everything's like done by AI agents, or HR department will be, managing the AI agents. They're saying that, SaaS companies or companies won't be built because instead there'll be AI agents doing everything for you, performing discrete tasks. So that's kind of where the next step is in terms of like basically automating everything, AI doing everything, AI doing media. So I think that's the media next step. I think it's kind of known, but that's kind of where everybody is saying. In the next 10, 15 years, this multipolarity geopolitics weaves into technology and AI somehow. So you may have like difference, right? You may have like a AI that's Chinese based, that's Indian based, that's Western based, etc. And I think the people that know how to manipulate those AI bits from everywhere, I think are going to be the winners. So when I think about 10, 15 years, I think about my kids, right? Like how do I train them? How do I think about them? And how are they going to deal with AI? Knowing your digital selves, your AI selves, how to interoperate the different AI selves, I think is really going to be important. And it's a skill that people that care about this will need to have because they're the ones that are going to be doing the work. But again, if you have lots of different selves, right? You've got a Western self, you've got a digital self, that awareness is going to be even more critical. What is my bias? What is the Western bias? What's the Chinese bias, right? What's the Indian bias? And that awareness of where I stand vis-a-vis all my digital selves and all my AI selves, I think is going to be critically important. One or two reasons. One is because you have to manipulate them and they will manipulate whatever is in the world. And I use manipulate not as a bad word, but as a you control them. The other piece, which is I think even more critical, is basically how they'll manipulate you. And what I mean by that is like, again, those AIs will feed you information. When you prompt something, it'll give something back. How you will interact with that response back is a function of yourself and your awareness of what's going on. If you're biased by that and you're not aware of it biasing you, you'll go along. But if you're aware of where its biases may be, you can control it and you can still have a say on where it's going to go. So that awareness is going to be even more key on that. And let me give you another concrete example. I'm a big fan of Arsenal Football Club. I think you've seen that on my Instagram. Arsenal Football Club, best club in the world. Followed them for years. They just played a big game against Manchester City. And there's a saying, there's a rivalry between the two because the best player on that team, Erling Haaland, told the manager Mikel Arteta last game before this one, stay humble, eh? Stay humble. And so there was this video a couple of days ago of a press conference of Mikel Arteta, the manager, manager talking about being humble and everything, right? In a retort back. So I've seen deepfake stuff and whatever, but this one was really, really good. It was really good. And it came across on a channel that really looked authoritative. And this was on Instagram, right? On Instagram, not just Twitter, not fringe stuff anymore, but really Instagram. And so that data that we see out in the world, whether it's a prompt, whether it's media, whatever source, will become more and more biased. And it's up to our own filter to try to figure that out. And so that awareness, ethical awareness, that situation awareness, I think will be even more critical to discern what is the truth and what do I want to take out of it. Again, there is no absolute truth, but at least you know where it is and where that stands vis-a-vis yourself. I think that discernment is critical. So for kids, for our kids, I think that's something that I try to teach and try to impart and try to keep grounded. I don't see it as a scary world for them. I see it as a tremendously powerful world. And I'll end with this. Remember when we were growing up, the people that got email the fastest, the people that got Facebook the fastest, the people that had access to Google and really understood Google the fastest really had the power, right? Because they were able to connect faster. They were able to search faster. AI will be the same. And people that know how to prompt, people that know how to work with prompts, they know how to discern information from prompts and information from ChatGPT will be the guys that actually were the first ones on Google. And so knowing how to manipulate it, knowing how to control it, knowing how to deal with it is especially critical. And that's a skill that they need to learn. But again, not be totally encapsulated and carried off with that, but really know how to control themselves within the AI technology and knowing who they are within the technology is really the most important piece.
I appreciate you being my first guest on What I Think and sharing your knowledge and sharing your opinions and your perspective. And we'll talk again.
Thank you very much for having me, Derek.